I'm not ashamed.
How does the trial of Jesus fulfill messianic prophecy found in Isaiah 53, verse 7? This is the question that we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Matthew on walking through the Bible.
The glory of his cross.
If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Matthew chapter 26. We're going to be reading from verses 57 to 68. If you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So, Matthew chapter 26, beginning at verse 57. And those who had laid hold of Jesus led him away to Caiaphas the high priest, where the scribes and the elders were assembled. But Peter followed him at a distance to the high priest's courtyard, and he went in and sat with the servants to see the end. Now the chief priests, the elders, and all the council sought false testimony against Jesus to put him to death, but found none. Even though many false witnesses came forward, they found none. But at last 2 false witnesses came forward and said, "This fellow said, I am able to destroy the temple of God and build it in 3 days. And the high priest arose and said to him, Do you answer nothing? What is it that these men testify against you? But Jesus kept silent. And the high priest answered and said to him, I put you under oath by the living God. Tell us if you are the Christ, the Son of God. Jesus said to him, It is as you said. Nevertheless, I say to you, hereafter you will see the Son of Man sitting at the right hand of the power and coming in the clouds of heaven. Then the high priest tore his clothes, saying, He has spoken blasphemy. What further need do we have of witnesses? Look, now you have heard his blasphemy. What do you think? They answered and said, He is deserving of death. Then they spat in his face and beat him. Others struck him with the palms of their hands, saying, Prophesy to us, Christ. Who is the one who struck you? In our last episode, Jesus was arrested in the Garden of Gethsemane. He had been betrayed by Judas with a kiss. One of the disciples had cut off the ear of the chief priest's servant and had been rebuked by Jesus. If Jesus needed protecting, Jesus could have called 12 legions of angels. Jesus was going to be arrested willingly, just as John 10, 17 and 18 said. So the multitude, having arrested Jesus, took him to Caiaphas the high priest. It is beginning here that people get confused because Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John all deal with the same story, but all add different details, and the timeline is not quite clear at first glance. Since we will be studying each book separately, we'll deal with the internal timeline that each book presents. Then, while dealing with John's account, we'll try to quickly put it all together. I know this will be a long wait as we intermix the Old Testament books along the way, but the Bible teaches that we need to be patient. So since I feel this is the easiest way forward, that's what we'll do. Jesus is now where the scribes and elders are assembled, along with Caiaphas the high priest. Remember from the last episode that all the disciples had fled. However, when it was safe to do so, Peter followed them at a distance and remained in the high priest's courtyard, and then went in and sat among the servants, as if he was a mere spectator. By following Jesus at all showed of his love for Jesus, but by not following closely behind them, it showed that Peter was afraid and didn't want others to think that he belonged to Jesus' disciples. This compromise would get him into trouble later, as we'll see in the next episode. Jesus is standing before Caiaphas the high priest and all the elders who are trying to find a charge they could condemn Jesus to death with. The Jews were trying Jesus by night, which in and of itself was wrong. But then, instead of finding actual witnesses that saw Jesus commit a capital offense, they tried to find witnesses who would lie. If you recall, under the law, in order to put someone to death, you needed 2 or 3 witnesses. And yet, even though they were corrupt, they couldn't find anybody who would lie against Jesus. Remember, Exodus 20 verse 16 said that you weren't to bear false witness against your neighbor. So if you lied in court, you would have equally broken the law. That the council had to resort to trying to find liars shows us that they knew Jesus didn't deserve to die, but they wanted him killed because they hated him. However, there were 2 false witnesses that came forward to testify of something that wouldn't be a capital crime. They testified that Jesus said he would destroy the temple of God and rebuild it in 3 days. Jesus said no such thing. We didn't read of it in Matthew, but in John 2:19-21, Jesus said something similar, but he wasn't referring to the temple of God, the literal temple. He was speaking of his body. Those present who wanted to understand could have, thus showing these witnesses to be liars. Jesus did not answer these charges, which seemingly made the high priest angry. That Jesus didn't answer these false charges is a direct fulfillment of Isaiah 53 verse 7, which says, He was oppressed and he was afflicted, yet he opened not his mouth. He was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before his shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. Jesus knew these charges were false. He knew the council knew they were false, yet no matter what he said, there was no way that Jesus would convince them to let him go, so he opened not his mouth. Add to that Jesus needed to die. He wasn't going to try and convince the council to let him go. The chief priest's patience had run out, though, and because Jesus wouldn't answer, he put Jesus under oath and asked him to declare to them whether he was the Christ, the Son of God. Before, the charges before him were false and therefore didn't need to be answered to. However, here his divinity is being challenged, and if he remained silent, he would be admitting that he wasn't the Son of God, which would be false. So he partially quoted Daniel 7:13, a messianic prophecy, affirming that he indeed was the Christ, the King of Israel, and the Son of God. The high priest tore his clothes and exclaimed that Jesus just blasphemed God by claiming to be God and had therefore committed a crime worthy of death in front of all of the council. He asked the council what they should do, to which they condemned Jesus to death. Having condemned him, they spit on him, beat him, and some struck him with their hands, telling Jesus that if he was the Christ, prophesy who it was who hit him. What humiliation! But that was nothing compared with what was to come. With that, our time is up for today. Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion in Matthew 26, verses 69 to 75, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time.
I'm not a
Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.
of his cross.